Hello, my name's Paul Cartwright, I'm the Product Director at TMP, and today we're going to talk you through what's new in Business Central over the last version primarily, but maybe a couple of versions back, depending on how you look at things. So today we're going to walk through application changes to Business Central that Microsoft have brought to us, split into several areas. First, we're going to look at the client. That's the user interface that we use to interact with the system, so the web client, the tablet, the phone, those sorts of things. Then we're going to look at some application level changes. That's basically the processes within the software, so how you might post a sales order or how you do certain parts of work inside Business Central. Next up, we're going to talk about Microsoft 365. So obviously Microsoft have been investing heavily with Business Central and improving the integration to Office 365 and Azure and Power Platform and those sorts of things. So we're going to group all that under the umbrella of Microsoft 365. And finally, we're going to have a little talk about some of the technical changes, some of the kind of under the hood pieces that Microsoft have added to the latest couple of versions of Business Central. So it's worth starting by saying there are 34 headline changes in BC20. Just in terms of terminology, BC20 is what Microsoft would call Business Central 2022 Wave 1, so the release that came out in April of 2022. It's the 20th version of NAV and BC, so commonly it's called BC20. But there are 34 headline changes in there, so 34 major changes that Microsoft have made that are worth really delving into. Of those, 53% of those changes have come from BC Ideas. BC Ideas is the Microsoft website for submitting ideas of what you want as customers and users and us as partners, what we want Business Central to do, what improvements we'd like to see in the product. So 53% of the major changes they've made in the last 6 months have come from that site. So the message here is, if you want to influence Business Central and how it works, go to that site and vote for your ideas. Add ideas and vote for ones you like. That is the best way to influence what Microsoft are doing with the platform. So with that said, first of all, let's talk about the client changes. So again, these are the tools we use to access the functionality within Business Central. So the first change, and I think this is a really significant one, is the ability to use Excel as a report layout tool. So in BC19, the previous version, 6 months prior, Microsoft released the ability to take your data from a report, say the inventory valuation report, and spit it out into Excel, unformatted, raw data, but the underlying data from that document in Business Central. What they've added since is the ability to take that same data that you can push out into Excel, and not only can you see the metadata, what filters you applied, how you structure that data, when you ran the report, those sorts of things, but you can also add your own sheets inside Excel with your own reporting structures, so pivot tables, charts, those sort of things. Usually things in Excel that react to data on other sheets, so pivot charts are a great example. You can then take that Excel document you've produced and saved to your local machine, and you can upload it back into Business Central as a report layout for that report. So going forwards then, you can say every time I run my, again, inventory valuation report as an example, instead of spitting out a PDF or a Word document, it'll produce an Excel document with updated data. So you can do really nice things using Excel as a mechanism to show data from Business Central. The only limitation we'd say of this is that whilst you can display the data any way you want in Excel, there isn't a standard tool for a non-developer to then add columns. So if there's data you want, extra information, you still need development tools to add that to be able to expose it in Excel. So tools like Jet Reports may still be a better option if you want to do complex Excel reporting. But if the data's already there, this is a really nice way to spit it out. Next up, again, the last couple of versions, Microsoft added a share menu. So from every page, every card page inside Business Central, you'll see a little share menu, and they've added the ability to share to teams from there. They've now also added this copy link option in there. All that does really simply is provide you a URL, like a web address, to that particular record inside Business Central that you can then share to other people. When they click on it, assuming they've got access to BC, they'll go straight to that item, that sales order, that purchase order, whatever it may be, that direct link. Another new feature that's worth talking about in the client level is the idea of guided tours. And again, this has been around a couple of versions, but Microsoft are continually investing in improving it. The idea of guided tours is when people first log into Business Central, when they first access the system, it should help them get around. And help them understand what the system can do and how it works. So this takes two major forms. Firstly, there are checklists, getting started checklists that appear on the role center when a user logs in. So here you can see this is a getting started checklist when you first log in. It'll give you a look around the system. It'll let you edit and analyze data in Excel. So it's going to talk about the export to Excel functions and other things. So it'll step you through some basic functionalities. So as you go through these tours, you can go from the checklists into various parts of the system, and these little help boxes pop out telling you how the major functions of that page or screen work. So if we're looking at a customer, it'll tell you what a customer is, how they're created, what the basic structure of a customer record inside Business Central is. And then some major functions. So if you want to create a new document for them, this is where you click. If you want to narrow down the list, if you want to filter, this is where you click and how it works. And if you want to see more information in fact boxes, it'll introduce you to that concept. So this is really nice for people that are new to Business Central that haven't used the client before, just stepping them through the basics of how you get around. But what's really nice is Microsoft have given the developers tools to write their own tours. So if you've got a new piece of functionality or custom functionality in your Business Central system, you could, as a developer, or ask the developer to add tours. So the first time someone logs in, they get a little guide on how this new bits of functionality works. So that's a really nice little feature that developers can extend. Next, the new desktop app. So in prior years, you have been able to download a desktop application for Business Central. We often see customers using Business Central as a web app, just going in through a web browser, but you can download an app. Microsoft have now taken that app away and replaced it with a brand new Business Central app that you can get from the Microsoft Store. And fundamentally, this is just a nicer way to use the standard web client. It wraps it up in a window, gives you an icon on your desktop or on your taskbar that you can click to go direct into BC, which gives a more native experience. But it's now live in the Microsoft Store and it works with Business Central on-prem and SaaS. This feature, the peak at related data, is a really nice one that we think is slightly undervalued, to be honest, and has been around again a couple of versions. Fundamentally, whenever you're looking at lists of data inside Business Central, if that list references some other record, so for example, in here I'm looking at a list of sales orders, and obviously I can see the sales order information, but also it's got a link to the customer that the sales order is for. Now, if you see those links, you can click on the little dotted line links, and it'll pop up a small little card showing you key information about that customer, their balance, their name, their main contact, those sorts of things. Similarly, if it was an item, it would show you information about the inventory of the item and what else. Now, what's interesting here is, again, this can be extended through development. So if it's not showing the information you want, it's not a major change to go in and add and change what these cards are showing whenever someone clicks on this little peak of data. But it means you don't have to drill around the system so much. You don't have to jump between screen to screen to find key information. Another major change that's come in the last couple of versions is the ability to compose emails with Word templates. I think if you're looking back a few versions, not that far ago, it's not that long ago that Microsoft added the ability to send emails from lots of documents inside Business Central natively. So previously you could always send the sales order confirmation as an email, but now you can just go to the customer card and say, I want to send this customer email from my Business Central system. So you could do that for a couple of versions. What they've added now is the ability to use templates to find those emails. So instead of having to send the same welcome email to a customer and compose it each time, you can save essentially a Word template, which acts a lot like a mail merge. So if you've ever done Word mail merge, it's the same technology. You can set up some templates, define them inside Word, just using normal mail merge technology, and then back to that customer card in BC, when I send them an email, I can now choose from one of those templates to send them information without having to reformat and recompose that email each time. This next change is something that's very significant really for people that have used Nav for a long time in Business Central. Previously this functionality was called Navigate, it got rebranded a few versions ago to Find Entries. But it's the ability from primarily posted documents to go and, or from ledger entries to go and navigate or find the entries relating to that document in the ledgers. What they've added to this now is no longer just about looking at data in ledgers. They've now extended it to be able to search for information about business contacts. So you can say, I want to go and find all the posted ledger entries, all the invoices, those sorts of things, for a particular customer or a vendor or those sorts of things. So they've added that ability to the find entry screen to now be talking about looking at data beyond the concept of just posted ledgers. You can also use this screen to look at lot tracking information. So if you've got an item, you want to look at their tracking information, the historical movements of that product, you can do that from this same screen as well. So they're really improving find entries to be more widely encompassing of functionality inside Business Central. Lastly, in our list of things they've improved in the clients, and I think this is just saying they're continually improving, is the speed of keyboard entry. I think it was a potential risk when they moved from the Windows clients, the native Windows apps in Nav, to the web client in Business Central, that data input speeds would be reduced because it wasn't so easy to use your keyboard. It was very mouse focused. And Microsoft in every release are adding more and more keyboard shortcuts. So this isn't a specific keyboard shortcut, but generally across the board they are adding loads and loads of new keyboard shortcuts to make it a much easier used system to use from your keyboard without having to touch the mouse. And they're improving the speed of that as well. So in terms of when you enter data from the keyboard into the system, some of the lagginess has gone away. They've improved the speed of that data being inserted into the particular cell that you type the data into. So that's really important. And it's something we expect them to continue to improve over the next several versions. So those are the major kind of changes in the client that we talked through. There's various areas from the Excel exports for reporting layouts, the guided tours to get people started, and improving older functionality that really bulks up things like the navigate and find entries and the keyboard entry is really something they've improved on over time. So the next section we're going to talk about is the application. Now this is probably the main area of the conversation today. This is where all the functional changes are. So where we've added, or Microsoft have added new functional areas, where they've improved existing processes, this is where that's going to be featured. So we split this up into several topics just to group the content a little bit. The first area you're going to talk about is finance, or general finance processes. So this change that Microsoft have made in the latest version is the ability to block VAT and general posting setups, which is something people had an issue with, but it wasn't very widely talked about, to be honest, which was often in systems, at the beginning, you'll set up posting setups because of the way you think the system's going to work. And as the system grows and matures and your business changes, those post setups might no longer be relevant. You might have changed the posting groups, you might have lost the accounts or end of life the accounts. Historically, if you've used that post setup, though, you couldn't get rid of it. So what Microsoft have given us the ability now, really simply, is they've added a block flag. So now you can say this post setup is, whilst it's still in my setup and still in the tables because we've used it previously, it can no longer be used. It's blocked from use, which is a really nice way to stop people doing the wrong thing or posting to the wrong entries. So, as I said, it's very simple. It's a blocked flag on the general post setup and the VAT posting setup to just prevent users from using the wrong combination of posting groups. This is a feature I think is really important, is they've added the ability on a sales document, primarily, to specify the bank account code that you want to receive payment to. So there is a setup to drive this if you want, against the currency, so, but you may just want to change it on the particular document. It's very simply when you produce the invoice on the piece of paper invoice or the PDF of the invoice, it'll change the bank account details that are shown to the customer for where you want them to send the cash. Moving through, much like the blocking and post setup, they have now added more control over the blocking of deletion of GL accounts. So it might be for statutory reasons you need to have an account you don't want to use anymore, but you need to keep it in your chart of accounts for so many years. Previously that was difficult to manage. Now there are setups in the general ledger setup to say I want to block the deletion of GL accounts. I can control what date ranges people can what date ranges are applicable. So I can say you can't delete any GL accounts that have been created before this date or have entries, beyond this date. So I need to keep this in my chart of accounts for 5 years, for example. And those sort of things can be set up in the general ledger setup. And you can fundamentally, from the setup, control whether accounts can be deleted at all. The benefit to that is it means only people that have access to this screen could then turn the setting off to delete a GL account. So it gives you a nicer granular control. An area that we're seeing Microsoft invest in over the last few versions is Intercompany. Previously, there was a change to allow the ability to send documents automatically. So when I create my purchase order in company A, automatically send it to company B through the outbox without me having to press a button. What they've now done is extended that functionality to allow auto accept. So whilst I could previously send the PO to the customer, to the company B, now I can get the company B to automatically accept that document into their system. It won't post it, it won't post a journal, those sort of things, but it will accept it, so it takes out that inbox, outbox kind of processing that would need to be done manually previously. Deferrals. This is a fairly new piece of functionality, it's only been around a few years, but Microsoft added a few nice features to it. So they've added the ability to limit the date ranges that deferrals can post to. Previously, it was out of your control, essentially. If you've got a deferral that's going to post over the next 12 months, it would allow the entries into your ledgers for the next 12 months. Now you can control that separately from your normal posting date ranges. So it might be you can only post directly in this current month, but you only want deferrals to post for the next 12 or next 6 months, for example. And that can be controlled at the general ledger setup, so for all users. It can also be controlled on a user-by-user basis. So really similar to the allow posting from and to date setups that we've had previously. Now there's just a extra set of options for deferral postings. Also in deferrals, they've added a new start date mechanism, which is beginning of next calendar year. This one came from BC Ideas, so it was a requirement people had. So they've now added it to the deferral template card. You can say the start date for this deferral is the next calendar year. On to preview posting. This is one of our favourite features that Microsoft added over the last few years, is the ability to preview postings and the effect of posting a document or a journal before you do so. And they added it to a lot of areas of the system, but now they're extending it into payment reconciliation journals. So it's really nice they've added it. It's now available in that area of the system, which it wasn't previously. And it's worth just coming back to that as well. A year ago or so, they improved the preview posting to be, as we said here, prettier. What we mean by that is they've added this really nice kind of structured view, tree structure style view of your preview posting. So you can see as you go through the system, when you preview post, now it'll give you a nicer view of where in the ledgers your entries will be posted rather than having to drill through a static list. This change came as somewhat of a surprise to us, to be honest, which is improvements to account schedules. It felt a bit like an area of the system that wasn't getting much investment, that kind of not being a focus for Microsoft. But it's nice to see that they're improving it. They've made a couple of significant but not massive changes, really. The first one is now they've added the ability for account schedules to have 15 columns as opposed to just 12, which is really nice when you want to show 12 months of data plus some comparison to budgets. So they've extended it from 12 to 15. The other thing they've done is hooked into the idea of account categories that we have now in Chart of Accounts, where you can categorize your accounts. And you can now use those categories as totaling mechanisms inside account schedules. So you can just set a bunch of accounts in your Chart of Accounts as for example, the assets accounts. And now instead of having to name those with their IDs inside your account schedules, you can just say total up all the asset accounts. And it does that really nicely. Finally, they've added import and export functionalities to account schedules, which is really nice when you want to create an account schedule in your test or sandbox systems, and then when you're happy with it, you want to deliver it to your production system. Previously, you'd have to use migration packages or those sort of things to do that. Now you can just export the account schedule to a file and import it into the destination system directly from within the client. So those are the key finance improvements that we looked at. There's a fair few, some of them are big, some of them are small, but it's nice to see a lot of quality of life improvements from Microsoft there. Next up is bank. So we've pulled this actually out of the kind of core finance improvements into its own section because there's been a couple of improvements here that we're talking about. Probably the most significant, the kind of headline one is the bank deposits document. So the bank deposit document is now a new record, a new document you can create so it's supposed to represent the idea of going to your bank with some cash or checks and depositing that as a single entry into your bank, but actually it references multiple customer payments or petty cash entries or whatever they may be. So in BC you can represent that now as a bank deposit record that has a headline lump sum figure, and then you can break out to how those cash receipts should be applied into your various subledgers. So The benefit here is previously you could only do this through a cash receipt journal, which had no kind of document around it. It didn't have this central document. The other thing that's really nice here is this ability to post it as a lump sum. That means in your bank ledger, you'll get one entry for the total amount, which represents what you will get on your bank statement, because as far as the bank is concerned, you've just paid in one lump sum. But on your subledgers, you'll get the details, so you'll reconcile correctly. What's also interesting with this bank deposit functionality on a more strategic level is this isn't necessarily a new feature to Business Central. What this is a feature that was previously in the US localization. So obviously the US companies do a lot of cash and check transactions with their banks. The reason this is interesting is because it shows how Microsoft are approaching localization and the future of localizations, which is extensions. Microsoft said a few years ago that their approach to that was to look around all the local versions of Business Central and find all the features that are somewhat generic. So bank deposits being a good example. They're then going to pull those, and they've done this now, into the W1, the worldwide base version of Business Central, which means everyone gets that functionality. That means when they come then to create, for example, the US localization as an extension, they only have to do things that are very specific to the US market or any other country, which makes the extension work smaller. So I think we'll continue to see this over the next few years, is Microsoft going around, picking out features from various localizations, different country localizations, bring them into the W1 version, which means we'll all get them, no matter which country we're operating in, and then gradually converting those localizations into small extensions for the very specific things. The other thing in bank they've done is they've improved the bank account statement report. Not huge changes here, just a couple of minor changes. They've added the GL balance as of that date, and they've also added outstanding checks. I think, again, this is stuff that's come from the US localization primarily, but it's nice to see they've improved that statement report because it missed a few features before. So banks had some key things, primarily that bank deposit change is the big one. Next up is changes in production and forecasting. We've grouped a couple of changes into this area. The first one is the ability for demand forecasts to support variance. Now, this is really important. It was a lot of the reason that people that do manufacturing and production often couldn't use demand forecasts was because they have variance on their item setups, and it simply wasn't supported in the data structures previously. So Microsoft have now added the variant column to the demand forecasts, which means you can, if you have items with variance, you can now use demand forecasts. Previously, we've seen a lot of customers and a lot of companies avoid the use of variance because of this lacking feature, which means they end up with lots of items. Now the option's there to use variance if you want to combine it with forecasts. The second significant change in production forecasting is on production BOMs. They've now added the ability to specify a fixed quantity on a production BOM. So regardless of scrap or those sorts of numbers, you can say, I'm always going to consume this quantity of item for every one of these things I make. So it's a fixed quantity change. This is a change we've done quite a lot as a mod for customers, so it's nice to see it becoming a standard solution. So those are the two changes in production forecasting we thought were worth highlighting at this point. Jobs. So again, this is an area of the system that seemed a little bit underinvested maybe from Microsoft, or there certainly wasn't as many changes as we thought there were over the last few years, but it's nice to see them investing again. And we'll see as we go through them, I think what they're trying to do is remove the requirement for people to use sales orders instead of jobs. We see a lot of implementations where people are using, where they have a jobs-based business, where they are delivering projects, but because of the way jobs work prior to the actual carrying out of the work, they use a sales order to do the original estimates and those sorts of things. So some of these changes are around that. The first change that really is part of that, taking ideas from sales orders and bringing it into jobs, is the ability to use different sell-to and bill-to customers. So it was previously missing that if you have a job, you could only bill the customer the job was for. You couldn't send invoices to a separate company. So now you can do that, much like you can do on the sales functionality. A piece that's a more significant change than that, I'd say, is the ability to support inventory and warehouse picks from a job. So previously, if you have a job where you want to consume some items to complete that job, you couldn't issue a warehouse instruction to go and get those products from the bin and move them around. So what Microsoft have done is added to the job planning lines the ability to specify a location and a bin code that you want to take that product from, And then from the job itself, you can hit either the create inventory or warehouse pick, depending on how your location's set up and what sort of warehousing you're using. And it'll generate a standard Business Central warehouse or inventory pick document linked to that job planning line. You'll see on the screenshot, the source document is job usage. So you can then complete that warehouse pick using all the standard warehouse processes. So if you're using a mobile client, such as mobile nav or Tasklet or those sort of things, you can still continue and use that device to carry out the pick, because it's just a normal pick. And then once you've registered the pick, it records on the job planning line the quantity picked. So now you can see I wanted one of these and it has been picked, sent to where I need to go to. What's just worthy of note here is the limitation on the functionality, which is you can't create a warehouse shipment in this process. The job planning line is linked directly to a pick. It is just an action to go and get that stock from that bin and bring it to wherever the job needs to take it. It's not to ship it out of the door to the customer. So that may be a feature will be added in future versions. And finally, again, coming back to this idea of taking features from sales orders and bring them into the jobs, is the ability to use the support for report sections for job quotes. Job quotes are the functionality we think kind of went under the radar a lot, which is the ability to use a job as a quoting document for the potential project. It's a really nice tool there because you can lay out your tasks, your stages properly as you would normally execute the project. One of the limitations previously was you couldn't specify different report layouts for those various job quote documents. So now it's been added into the standard report section functionality. You can choose which report ID to use for job quotes. So jobs has had some significant functionality improvements in terms of the inventory and warehouse picks, but also some minor mods to kind of bring it in line with the sales functionality of the system. Next up, e-commerce. So there's one major significant change in the e-commerce space from Business Central BC20 is the introduction of a Shopify connector. So at the moment for SaaS only, although we think it's coming to on-prem as well, Microsoft have commissioned or written a native Shopify connector. So if you're not aware of what Shopify is, it's an e-commerce platform that lots of businesses use for selling goods online. It's a really nice standard platform. And what Microsoft have done is said they've gone away and written an integration to Shopify supporting various processes. So they've supported synchronization of items and product information between the two systems, customer information. From Business Central, you can push your imagery levels to your e-commerce platform in Shopify. And obviously from Shopify, you can then pull the orders from into BC and create the normal sales order documents to go through your normal processes. And then finally, you can push fulfillment information, carrier information, shipping dates, and those sort of things from BC back into your Shopify system. So those are the points of integration. The other things worthy of note is they've added the ability for one Business Central company, one system, to support multiple storefronts in Shopify, multiple Shopify sites. So that's native in the connector. This is just been released. It came out actually a week or two ago as in BC 20.1. So it's there to play with, and it works very nicely in SaaS. So we think for most customers that have got a normal Shopify site and a normal Business Central SaaS system, this is probably the way to go for integrating to Shopify these days. It looks like they've done a really good job on it. So that's the Shopify connector. That's the big change in e-commerce. And then some general changes, things we couldn't find a better topic for maybe. One of my favourites is the ability to check documents and journals while you work. What they've done is added a fact box to journals and purchase and sales documents called Journal Check or Document Check. And what he's doing is checking the journal or the document as you type the data in to show you issues that you're going to get if you try and post it. So for example, if the journal's out of balance, or if on a purchase order you've not specified the vendor invoice number or you've not specified a quantity, it'll tell you the errors. And as you update the information in the document or the journal, it'll show you the errors have gone away. And so it'll then hopefully allow you to post it. This is really nice for preventing the post, oh, there was an error, let me fix the error, post again, oh no, there's still another error, fix that error. That kind of back and forth that people often get into, because it'll show you all the potential errors that you're going to hit. It's worth noting though that it doesn't check posting setups. So if you can still hit post and it'll fail because there's not a valid posting setup for the document or journal. So it doesn't go to that depth. But it's a nice first pass to help you prevent that post-fail kind of process. This is a change that we've done multiple times for customers as a modification to Business Central, which is really nice, it's now coming standard, is the idea of consolidating customer and vendor balances. So you may have business partners that you are both a customer of and a supplier to a vendor, that you're a customer of and a supplier to. So they are both a customer and a vendor to you. Previously, those had to be two totally separate independent records that never knew about each other from a BC point of view. So now what they've had the ability to do is you can link the customer and the vendor together, and when you do that, on the customer card you'll see the vendor's balance, and on the vendor card you'll see the customer's balance. So you can immediately see, we owe them £100 and they owe us £200, for example. The next step of that, which they've done as well, which is really nice, is on payment journals then there's an extra functionality to net off those two balances. So if you owe someone £200 and they owe you £100, it'll net off to potentially say, well, only pay them the 100, that's the difference. It doesn't just happen, you have to run a function to do it, so you might, which is nice because you might not want to work in that way, but it's a really nice feature they've added. Next up, default dimensions and locations. Again, this is in the category of things we've done plenty of times for various customers as a modification that's now part of the standard solution. This is the ability on a location card to specify the default dimensions, much as you can on a customer or an item or a vendor, all those sorts of things. So now when you transact, when you post a purchase order or a sales order against that location, it'll inherit the location dimensions through to those documents. It's worth noting, by the way, it doesn't support transfer orders, so it doesn't seem to inherit the dimensions to transfers, which is worthy of note if you are using dimensions linked to locations. This change actually has been around for a while, but we thought it's highlighting now because it's becoming, very soon it'll become the default only way to do sales and purchase and job prices. Microsoft have significantly changed the sales, purchase and job price functionality in Business Central from what it was a few years ago. It's now much more structured around the idea of a price list header and lines. So you don't just have a flat list of prices, you now group them into headers and lines. And those headers specify things like when these prices will be applied, which sort of customers or vendors these will be applied to, those sorts of things. It's a significant change, we think really nice. It ties in best how people tend to talk about price lists and purchase price lists. So it's a really nice change, but it has been around for a while as an option. It's going to become the default very soon, so it's a thing that we need to start embracing. So those are the general kind of changes that we thought were worth highlighting. So that brings us to the end of the application level of changes. Now I want to talk about some changes in Microsoft 365 world, these integrations to other Microsoft products. First up is Office. So there's a big investment in integrating Business Central with Office from Microsoft because those are two tools that really are on most people's computers these days. The first one is the ability to share files through OneDrive. Previously, there was a function to open a file that's an attachment for Business Central in OneDrive. So you could click on the attachment, open it in OneDrive and see it previewed in your browser or saved to your personal OneDrive. Now what they've added is the ability to click a share icon, and instead of having to save the file to a computer and send it to someone, it'll open the normal OneDrive sharing link, so you can now send that link to anyone you want and they'll access the file through the OneDrive system. So it's a really nice, easy way to directly share an attachment from Business Central to anyone. They don't have to have access to BC, it's worth saying. This is just file sharing. Next, they've continued their investment in the Outlook add-in. This is a really popular feature of Business Central that we find lots of people use. The thing they've added to the mechanism is the ability to capture attachments from emails and store them inside Business Central. So now if you have an email and you have your attachment fact box, you have your Business Central fact box in Outlook, you can go to the attachments in Business Central, click attach files, and it'll now offer to attach the files from the email. What that'll do is grab the attachment from the email and attach it to wherever you are in Business Central at that point in time. So it's a really quick, easy way to grab attachments from Outlook and stick them directly into Business Central. In the same sort of vein, Teams integration, a really popular tool, piece of work that Microsoft have done recently. This continues to show investment and improvements. From the Teams integration, from Teams you can search Business Central contacts. So if I want to reference a contact, I can search it directly from my Teams chats. I can also show contact cards or content cards inside Teams. So if I link or if I share a contact or if I use that copy link to show an item, for example, it'll give me a nice preview inside my Teams conversation to anyone that has access to Teams. so that they can also then drill through from Teams, click a button to see the details, and within Teams it will open up the contact card. Again, that's Business Central being surfaced inside Teams. So those are the major changes. It's improvements to OneDrive sharing, the Outlook add-in, and the Teams integration is taking steps forward. Next up, Power Platform, a big topic for Microsoft, a big topic for us at the moment, and I think a really growing area of Microsoft's place in the workspace. So they've continued to improve the integration between the Power Platform and Business Central. The first one, this is a fairly technical thing they've done, is they're now supporting in Business Central 20 Dataverse data change events. Fundamentally, what this means is in Dataverse, which is the database within the Power Platform where you often sync Business Central data or other systems data, now using the virtual entities mechanism, where you can expose Business Central data into the Dataverse without syncing, so just live views of data, they're now starting to support data change events. That means if you are exposing Business Central data to the Dataverse via this virtual entity mechanism, if you change some data in Business Central, like you rename a contact or you add some information to an item, that will then trigger normal Dataverse change events, which means if you've got a process in Power Platform, for example, if you've got a flow that is triggered when someone changes the customer's name, that will now trigger from Dataverse directly, even though the change was made in Business Central. So all those events flow through, whereas they didn't previously. So it's a really big improvement to the Dataverse integration, but it is fairly technical. Next up, probably this is categorized under Dataverse integration, probably is more aimed at the what was previously Direct CRM or Direct 365 sales integration. They've now improved some of the functionality around that. Primarily, this idea of mapping Dataverse option sets. So previously, there was work had to be done manually to do this. Now, things like payment terms, shipment methods, and shipping agents have native mapping or coupling to Dataverse. So you don't need to do any custom work for that now. Using the standard connector, you can just link those to Dataverse, their Dataverse comparisons. Next is the Power Automate connector. So Microsoft have had a Business Central Power Automate connector natively for a long time. They are continuing to improve it though. The significant changes we've seen in the latest versions are the ability to support custom APIs. So if you've got a module, either a custom development or an app source app or those sort of things, that adds APIs to Business Central, they're now surfaced inside the Power Automate connector and you can access them directly. So now you can extend and use this your Business Central system, and all that information will be accessible from Power Automate. This is a big change because previously you'd have to use a custom connector and some technical work, development work to integrate that way. It's also worthy of note, it's not in this screenshot that I've got on the screen, but they have now removed the preview tag as well from that connector. So now it's a fully released connector that you can use without risk of it being kind of significantly changed from preview. The other significant change that we're seeing that they're going to introduce soon, although it's not available quite yet, is the ability from Business Central pages to trigger a Power Automate flow. So if you've got a flow, for example, you have a flow that sends the welcome pack to new customers. Previously, you'd have to go to Power Automate and press a button to run that. Whereas now, that flow can be surfaced inside Business Central from the normal Business Central menus to say, I have a flow designed to run against this type of record, be it a customer or an item, and it will trigger directly from that user account. This is really nice. It means that you can add essentially buttons to Business Central to do whatever you can do in Power Automate Flow, which is a lot. So you can really extend this functionality. The big thing it does is it passes the context. So it tells Flow, Power Automate, this was triggered from this customer or from this item or from this sales order. So if you want to include information about the document from BC in your process going forwards, all that information is passed with that trigger. So those are the significant Power Platform changes, some big investments in technology, and they really are improving and making Business Central and the Power Platform work natively together. So last up in our areas that we want to run through is some technical pieces. Fundamentally, the major investment Microsoft are making from a technical perspective is in performance. So we're not going to go into too much depth. We'll do other sessions around these areas. But Microsoft is seeing that there's a demand to be able to write code that is more performance, certainly on the SaaS environments, but also for use on-prem. they're also seeing that the ability to write extensions, which is how Business Central is extended, how we as developers make changes to your system, we need more tools to be able to do that in a performant way, not to slow down the system because it's been modified. So there's some key changes they've made. The first one is the ability to add keys to base tables. If you want to sort your customer list by a non-standard field or a field that isn't previously configured for normal sorting, for example, you want to sort it by the postcode, for example. If that's not in the keys that Microsoft provided, developers can now add that as an extension key. That means you can really improve the speed of sorting and listing and those and getting to data around the system from an extension development. Next up, this idea of partial records. This gets into a fairly technical area about how adding fields to tables through extensions can slow your system down if it's done en masse and probably not through too many different extensions. Fundamentally, under the hood, SQL has to work really hard to get the data from lots of places to provide you that item list, wherever it may be. What Microsoft have added this ability under the hood to provide a thing called a partial record. What that means is, instead of saying every time I ask for a item, I get everything, including all these extension fields, a developer previously could say, well, I'm only looking at the item number and its description and its price, so don't worry about loading all the data from the extensions. But you had to do that as a developer manually. What Microsoft have now done is added that as a standard feature on list pages. So what that means is, if your list page, your item list, doesn't show that field you added from an extension, under the hood, every time you open that list, it won't ask SQL for that information, which means it should be much quicker. So basically, partial records are a really nice way of reducing the deficit you get from performance from adding lots of extensions with lots of fields in them. Next up, OData read-only intent. Certainly if you're on SaaS and optionally on-prem, Microsoft provide a second copy of your database, which is read-only, which is great for reporting and those sort of things because accessing it doesn't hit your live production database. You can now, when you're calling into the APIs, when you're calling into the OData mechanisms to get data out into other systems, you can now tell the system, hey, I'm only reading this data, so if possible, get it from that read-only copy, don't get it from my production write version of the database, which should mean greater performance for APIs. And finally, including columns, that's a technical thing around how SQL indexes can be built. Basically, you can have facts on the index. It's a really technical thing. If you want to talk about that, give us a shout and we'll go into more depth. But if you understand the concept of included columns, it's a big important improvement on what we have the ability to support when we're doing indexing of data. And finally, the last technical thing I want to talk about is problem solving. The major change here is the introduction a couple of versions ago, which have continued to improve, of snapshot debugging on production systems. This is really important for SaaS. Previously on SaaS systems, developers and support companies like ourselves had no ability to debug and connect directly to your production system to see what was going on, why that user would get an error every time they tried to change that piece of information or run that process. The only option was to try and reproduce it on a sandbox system and hopefully get all the data synced up to make that error the same. Now, using this snapshot debugger, we can connect, or partners can connect a debugger direct to someone's live production system. They can get the user to repeat the process again, and then they can look at what happened under the hood in the code. So that should help a lot of the support potential for support problems with SaaS production systems. The other piece this gives us, that same technology, the snapshot debugger, gives a really nice tool called the AL Performance Profiler, because not all problems are errors. It might just be that every time I open the customer card, it's really slow. I don't know why, but something's going on. There's something happening that means it takes 5 seconds to open the customer card, and it used to take like 0.1 of a second. So what's going on? So using that same snapshot debugger, now we can connect, or partners can connect to a production system, get the user to open the card or do the process they think is slow, and then it'll break down line by line from function by function of code exactly what was triggered, how long each thing took, and also which extension that code is in. So it's a really nice way to say, oh, I can see what happened. Someone made a change in extension that made that do some more work under the hood, which made it really slow to that process now. So it's a really nice tool for working out why that thing is now slower than it used to be. So these two tools really help on performance and problem solving it's particularly for SaaS production systems, but these are both available for on-prem as well, and are really great tools. So that really brings me to the end of all the things I want to talk about and what's new in the latest couple of versions of Business Central. Hopefully you find that useful. There's more information here, so if you either follow that QR code or copy that link, the quickest way is just to Google what's new in Business Central 2022 Wave 1. All the details and more of what we talked about is all there, and Microsoft published that for everyone to get to. So go there, have a look if you want more information, or give us a call. We'd love to show you some of the new things that Microsoft have added. And last, just to appeal to your to you again, if you want to influence what Business Central is doing, your voice is heard best if you go to BC Ideas and put votes on things you like or add your new ideas. That's the way to get information there. Microsoft are listening. Lots of the things they're doing are coming from that BC Ideas site. And with that, thank you very much for your time. I hope that was useful, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.